Well, good morning and welcome here. Friends, if somebody's new with us, if you're visiting here, special welcome to you. So glad you could join in. My name is Paul, and I have the privilege of serving as the lead pastor here at Lakeview. Now, today we continue our series, A Gift, the Church in God's Story, as we journey through the letter to the Galatians that Apostle Paul had written. And as I was reading Galatians chapter 2, which will be our text for today, I was praying through it and reading about it and thinking about it as I was writing, and the story kept coming back to my mind. And it's a story when I was just a freshman in high school. I was this, how old would I have been, 14? How old you are in grade 9, 14? I guess Dal and the youth have left. I think I was 14 years old and got to high school, and it was one of those first weeks there. Now, I grew up in my teen years here in Saskatoon, so I was at Aiden Bowman. That was the high school I went to, where my wife now teaches, so I have constant PTSD when I go there. Just kidding, sort of. But yeah, there I was, freshman. I got there, I had my backpack, we were figuring out things, we got our lockers, we got our locks, and all that kind of stuff. And in the midst of the day, I came to the place where our Aiden Bowman cafeteria is. Now, it's a small open space. Those of you, there might be students there, or maybe students there now. It's not a huge space, but it's kind of an open space, and we had long rows of tables and plastic chairs set up, and there was a buzz in the air. There was lots of people meeting, and there's just like there's a hallway, and there's a little hallway before the cafeteria, and I was in that little part of the hallway kind of like looking in, kind of scoping it out, seeing what's going on. And I remember that even at 14, I could feel that where I would sit would matter. Where I would sit would determine who I'm aligning with, who I am, who I wanted to be. And so sitting was really, really important. And as I looked around, there was, a corner of the seniors. They kind of had a few tables to themselves, the grade 12 students, and there was some, the jocks, and then there was all these, I hate these kind of labels, but they were kind of reality. Then there was like skaters, and then there was like the cool kids, and then there was a group that played magic cards. It was like a thing in the 90s. I don't know if that's still a thing. But there was a group of them, they were hanging out, and then just the rest of the kids and students were just gravitating kind of to their own kind and finding their own space. And in that moment, it felt like eternity, first of all, just staring and kind of figuring out where I would end up. And it really, at 14 years old, it really felt like this will really determine my next 4 years. Where I sit will really, really matter. And if I'm honest, at 14, little Paul thought, oh my goodness, this is going to determine my rest of my life. Like where I sit will matter so, so much. And so I looked around. Some other kids made eye contact with me. Others looked away. Not that kid. Make sure he doesn't sit here. Others didn't say anything. I looked and looked, and I made my decision. I went home for lunch. The choices we make, who we sit with and who we don't, might seem a little bit trivial, talking about it now in hindsight. But in the moment, it feels like everything. Feels like everything. And the truth is, moments like these don't just disappear with age. They show up in different ways throughout our every stage of life because they touch something deep in us. Our sense of belonging, our experiences with being welcomed or not, and the questions of who we are. Questions of identity. What table we're invited to speaks of who we are or who we want to be. Now, last week we looked at how Apostle Paul, confronted the churches in Galatia, and he said, you're turning to a different gospel, one that isn't good news at all. They're being convinced that into a way of thinking, these churches in Galatia, that you have to earn this grace. You have to earn this way into the church. You have to earn your way into God's presence. And Paul is confronting them, and he's angry about it, and this whole letter is emotional, and it doesn't follow the rhythms of his other letters because he's so frustrated and angry. It's one of his earlier letters. And so he reminds them that grace can't be earned. It doesn't work like that. He says grace is a gift. It's a gift to receive, and it's a gift to share. And then we said last week, if you try to earn it, you will ruin it. You will ruin it. So today we move into Galatians 2, where we witness a tense moment between two spiritual giants of the church. We have Paul and Peter. And so in the first chapter, Paul confronts the churches in Galatia. He says, who did this to you? What are you doing? You're turning away from the real God. You're turning away from the good news. And then in this chapter, he actually confronts Peter. Peter, the one Jesus called the rock, the foundational leader of the early church. The one who followed Jesus, who listened to Jesus, who was in Jesus' company, who Jesus invited as one of the, of the 12, but then there's also 3, he had this special insight to Jesus. Also the one who denied Jesus, but the one that Jesus restored and commissioned. Go feed my sheep. This same Peter is being confronted by Paul. Paul, on the other hand, is this former persecutor of the church, a strict teacher of the law who was a Pharisee, who saw himself as this elite person within the chosen people of God, who went around making sure that the law was followed perfectly, and these churches, these cults that were rising up had to be squelched. He was making sure people would go to prison. And then Paul meets Jesus on the road to Damascus, and his entire world is turned upside down. He becomes not only a believer, but one who of the fiercest proclaimers of this grace that he receives from Jesus himself. And so now these 2 men, both leaders, both transformed by Christ himself, come face to face in a moment of confrontation. And so here's what happens. We're going to read from Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 to 13. Paul is writing here, but he's also writing what he's doing. So it's Paul here speaking. He says, "But when Peter came to Antioch, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised." So he ate with anyone who's not Jewish. "But afterward, when some friends of James came, Peter wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore." He was afraid of criticism from these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. As a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy, and even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. Never meet your heroes, they say. So what's really happening here? Paul is confronting Peter, the rock on whom the church was being built. Peter shares a meal with Gentiles at first, no problem. He's there. But then a certain group shows up, and suddenly Peter is nervous of their opinion. Suddenly sharing a table and a meal, sitting beside these people, all of a sudden meant something completely different. And so he pulls back. He changes tables. And Paul is livid about it. Why is Paul so upset? Well, because a meal is never a meal, is it? Sharing a table isn't just sharing a table. Where we sit and who we sit with matters. Across most cultures, meals carry a really deep meaning. Meals are gestures of hospitality. They're gestures of welcome. They're a sign of belonging. They're a sign of saying you're part of this community. You're with us. We accept you. We welcome you. In many places, to share a table is actually to extend peace. It's an offer of reconciliation, to express generosity and love to others. An open table like that says, what I have is yours. I'm glad to share it. And so it's an act of vulnerability, a declaration of trust. It's a giving of a gift. Here's my food that I need to live on, but I'm going to share it with you. It's a gift. What it declares is that this food shared is a meal of welcome, a table of belonging, and a place of identity. Meals matter. Growing up, meals were a big deal in our home. My mom and dad would host my uncles and aunts and cousins and grandparents, and we would always get together for meals. And it was just like, I'm so fortunate because not everybody's story is like this, but those gatherings were such a special time. When I look back on it, I always feel that was a space of like warmth and safety, and it was laughter and joy, and we always looked forward, cousins coming over, and we would listen to grown-ups tell the same stories every year, over and over, the same exact stories, and then they would kind of correct each other with the details. And but it was like the same story, and we'd all laugh as if we heard them for the first time. It was a special, special time. Meals were a big deal. And so when I look back on the history of meals and tables that I've shared, there's a lot in my life that I really joyfully remember. And there was one that, as I was thinking, I was looking at Galatians, that really stuck in my mind. And it was a meal that I won't forget in many ways, but it was, I know things were getting serious with my now wife, Jessica, when I was dating her. I was 17 years old. We met in high school, in youth group, And so we started dating, and it was going well. And so her parents invited me over for supper. Now, I think my mother-in-law might be here. I didn't tell her I was going to tell this story, so it's good. It's a good story. I was told when I was younger as a pastor, another pastor friend of mine said, if you're going to tell stories, make sure you let people know the stories you're going to tell. Don't surprise them with them. And I just realized I'm surprising. It's a good story. So I was invited over for a meal. I knew things were getting serious. You know, this is a big invitation. And for some people, that might not be a big deal. You're like, so what? I'm being invited for a meal. That's fine. But as 17-year-old Paul, I was like, this is a huge deal. Meals are important in my family. Meals is a real thing. It's a rite of passage. I'm being welcomed into her home, into the orbit of their family. I'm entering into the sacred ground, their dinner table. This is a huge thing. So I made myself so nervous. I was thinking about this the whole week. I mean, Jessica kind of just dropped it. She's like, yeah, my parents want to have you over. Just come over. I'm like, oh, okay. And so all week I was thinking about it. What do I wear? What do I not wear? Do I go really formal? Well, no, it's not a job interview. I mean, sort of. Do I go casual? Well, I don't want to look like a schmuck. Like, what? Do I bring something? Do I bring flowers? Is that weird? Like a 17-year-old brings flowers to his girlfriend's parents? Is that normal? Do I bring dessert? Do I bring a bribe? What do I do here? And so I had all these conversations running in my head about this meal. Like, it was stressing me out. And I was rehearsing questions that might be asked. Like, I was thinking, like, well, they're probably going to ask me a bunch of questions, and I should have answers to this. I don't want to stumble. So I was thinking about, like, well, they'll probably ask me if I have a job. Yep, I have a job. I'm working. Do you go to church? Yeah, I'm going to church. What are your intentions? To be good friends. All those kind of things. And then, like, your 17-year-old brain just keeps rotating. Like, can you parallel park under pressure? Well, they ask me that. Yeah, I can do it. Do you know how to change a tire under enemy fire? Yep, I think I can do it. Would you be willing to take a lie detector test? Just normal things that 17-year-olds think about when they're about to meet the parents of their girlfriend. So the day arrived, and I drove my 1986 Honda Civic with a broken muffler that you could hear from 4 blocks away, and walked up to the front door. My heart was pounding. I knew this was more than a meal. I was really nervous. They were welcoming to the family space, into the rhythms, and I came in, and this is when my wonderful now sister-in-law loudly proclaimed, "What's he doing here?" I didn't tell her I was going to say that either. I'm not sure if she's here. Friends, a meal is a meal until it's not. It's a space where we decide who is welcome, who belongs, and what this will mean for the identity of the group that welcomes you. And that's why what happens in Galatians 2 around a shared meal matters so much. In Antioch, what is now southern part of modern-day Turkey, there's a vibrant, growing center of Christian mission. And in it, these Jewish and Gentile believers are sitting down at the same table. It's radical. It's absolutely radical. Walls are coming down around these meals. New humanity is taking shape. A kind of community Jesus had envisioned, a diverse, multi-ethnic, but equal group of people. Equal not because they have achieved something or because they proved something or they did something or they have right answers, but equal because of the grace of Jesus. And Peter was right there with them, eating, laughing, living out the gospel of welcome until he wasn't. A group arrives, and Peter shrinks. He pulls back. And so Paul confronts him publicly. Not because Peter made a social misstep. We have to really catch this. It's not because Peter just he kind of made a mistake or he kind of goofed. No, Paul confronts him because Peter in his action is distorting the good news. He's distorting the gospel. By refusing the table, he was saying these people aren't fully like us. It's not just, I don't know. It's a question of inclusion. And he says, no, these people are not like us. They're not true Christians. They're not the chosen people of God, not yet. He shrinks and distorts the good news. And Paul knows this isn't just some poor judgment moment. It was denial of the very grace they have all been given. the very grace that Jesus extended and modeled himself. Now, to understand this better, we actually need to understand something that was deep reality in the Jewish culture, something called table of fellowship. Now, in ancient Judaism, who you ate with was a matter of religious law and purity, but it was also a way of saying who's with us, who's our family, who belongs. So meals were often regulated by, the Levitical purity laws, the kosher things. Certain foods were clean or unclean. And eating with someone who was impure could make you impure. Meaning that eating with the wrong person could remove you from being able to go near the presence of God. That's a huge deal. Eating with the wrong person could exclude you from going to the temple to be near God. That is a bigger deal than just making a misstep or making a mistake. Table of fellowship was therefore a boundary marker of religious and ethnic identity. It proclaimed who's in and who's out. This is why when we read the Gospels and Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, just can't even comprehend it. And they're so outraged that Jesus would do this. In fact, our modern selves don't see the full offense of Jesus' actions in these meals because, upon many, many factors, but one is that our hurried culture. Food has become important, but not important all at the same time. We live in a time and culture of fast food, microwavable meals, and this hurried life removed us from the importance of meals and tables with other people. So not only do we not share the power of the meal, we also are not as astonished with Jesus eating with quote unquote sinners. We think and say things like, well, of course Jesus did that. He's a good guy. He's nice. Of course he would eat with them. He loves everyone. And we kind of move on. But in that culture, sharing a meal wasn't just a casual or neutral act. It was bold, public declaration. The person across from me belongs. They are welcome. They're like family. Now imagine if that's the case and that was the cultural truth, imagine now the Pharisees, men deeply committed to following every command of God, striving for purity so they could dwell in the presence of God. And then Jesus comes along, sitting at a table with sinners, and through his actions declaring, this one sitting across from me at the table, this outcast, is family. They belong. To the Pharisee, it was shocking and offensive. It didn't just challenge their theology, it threatened their entire identity right to the core. So we need to understand those dynamics at play. So when Paul is challenging Peter, he's not just challenging for a mistake. And when Jesus modeled eating with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes, he isn't just being nice. He's radically turning everything upside down, renewing all things, leveling out hierarchies, and offering grace to all people. It's massive. It's things that we say often and maybe in fragmentations, but the reality of these moments of the meal and the table are so significant. So significant. And we may miss them because of our cultural moments. But if we just pull back a little bit and look at even our recent history, in some places today, people are still told they can't sit at certain tables. They can't do that because of the color of their skin, maybe because of their religion or their accent, because they're seen as other, and because of that, they're excluded. Sometimes it's social pressure, but sometimes it's actually written into law. This is because to share a meal is one of the most powerful acts of inclusion. Is the declaration of welcome, belonging, and identity. So in Antioch, that's exactly what is happening. The gospel was creating something new and beautiful. This multi-ethnic, reconciled family in Christ, sharing life and meals together. Until it wasn't. These people from Jerusalem, friends of James, steeped in Jewish law and tradition, they show up and Peter pulls back. He stopped eating with the Gentile believers. And what happens, friends, is fear began to speak much louder than love. And in doing so, Peter didn't just withdraw, he led others with him, right? It wasn't just Peter's mistake. Now, because he's the leader, he's the guy that walked with Jesus, he's the one, he's doing all these things, his actions not only distorted the good news, but they began to influence others to do the same. Even Barnabas moves away, Paul names. He's astonished by it. He's frustrated by it. Because these actions give an impression that the work of Jesus might not be sufficient in his grace. And so Paul is livid. He is livid. He's angry. And Peter's hypocrisy has the power to distort Jesus' grace. And so Paul's emotional letter does not want us to miss that. It does not want to miss that it is not just some mistakes, it's not some things that just kind of happen, that this would be a way of seeing God in the wrong way. If Peter and his actions were to be allowed and would go unnoticed, this would speak loudly about who Jesus is and what grace is about. It would make us believe that we still have to act in certain ways to reach God's forgiveness. But I also want to say there's something else going on here that we need to be very careful when we read this. Because when we read this, and when we read Paul confronting Peter, and as you read this chapter through the week in your home churches or in your own, maybe what comes to mind is that we read this and say, finally, somebody tells them like it is. Finally, Paul saw wrong, and he was bold and courageous and unflinching, and he did it. He spoke the truth. And in that kind of reading, we may actually miss the point of this chapter and jump into imagining ourselves being like Paul. And we might be tempted to imagine ourselves calling those people, the ones I talked about last week. I said, as you read this, there's going to be people that come to mind, faces, communities, groups. And you might be tempted to think of those people, the ones you disagree with, the ones that are, they do church wrong, they do Christianity wrong, they do politics wrong. And you might imagine yourself being in Paul's place, calling them out, telling them what it's really like. And you position yourself in his shoes. But this is why we need to read so carefully. Because Bible is brilliant. And in its brilliance, it often holds up a mirror. And the person it's telling you about, the one who failed, who backed out, who gave into pressure, who was hypocritical, isn't just those people. It's you. And it's me. It's me and you. It's us. Whenever we remove ourselves from them, those people that we want to just tell off. Whenever we, for good religious reasons, separate ourselves and place them into a category of unworthy, undesirable, unwanted, whenever we place them into second tier of people or class, whenever we do that, we are Peter. Peter's failure wasn't just a moment of awkwardness or rudeness. It was a gospel failure. By pulling away, he distorted the message of grace. He sent a signal that some people belong more than others, that some were second-class citizens in God's kingdom, and Paul wasn't having any of it. And so we have to be really careful when we read these passages and imagine ourselves as Paul calling them out, those people that came up to our minds that just don't do things right. Because when we do that, we actually place ourselves in Peter's shoes and not Paul's. Because the gospel is an announcement of one new humanity, one new family in Christ, not defined by race, law, or status, but by grace. And we will look at that closely, what this one family really means next week in chapter 3. But for now, what Paul has reminded us is that to change tables is to change the message of God. To shrink away is to shrink the good news. So if our impulse when we read this confrontation is to blast those people, to draw new lines, to build new walls, you, we, and I have to be careful, because that impulse is actually doing what Peter did and not what Paul is doing. And when we do that, we don't just move away from people, we close the table, don't we? As soon as we blast those people or talk about them not doing things right, we close the table. But Paul in his confrontation is inviting us to do the opposite. I mean, that's really the lesson here. Not how to be more confrontational about our faith, but rather inviting us into a grace-filled life. how to be more gracious, how to not close doors, how not to pull away, how not to make the table closed, how not to pull chairs away and say this is unavailable. Paul is inviting us into a grace-filled life that says the table is open because grace makes room. Friends, the gospel, the good news, pulls up more chairs to the table, not fewer. It opens the table. The Apostle Paul is livid with anyone who would dare to challenge that good news. He's furious with anyone who says, how dare you close this table? How dare you do this and actually influence others to do it as well? Paul, a Pharisee who for so long in his life promoted the closed table, but after encountering the resurrected Christ, cannot and will not close the table again. Will not do it. His whole life was about the closed table. And he encounters Jesus and he says, no, we can't. What are we talking about? We can't ever go back to that. Peter, what are you doing? So can I invite you to consider something this week? Can I invite you in your home church or in your solitude time as you read Galatians, as you ponder in this, can I invite you to examine your table? To ask, who's there? Who's at my table? Who's missing? And who would you hesitate to sit with if others were watching? That's hard work. But can I invite you, as I'm going to do so myself, to examine my table, asking myself, who's there, who's missing, and who would I hesitate to sit with if others were watching? And as you sit on this, and as you examine, and as you ponder, as you pray through this, then can I invite you into some action steps so that you can then practice the open table? So as you have examined and to practice the open table, to do something small that says to someone, you belong. And maybe sit with someone who feels overlooked. Or maybe make space for someone different than you at your table. See, the gospel is good news that grace is for everyone, available to everyone, and the table is open and more chairs are being set every day. So the gospel says, pull up a chair. There's room for you at this table.